We thought we were drilling through time, but we punctured something far older than memory, and it woke up. My name is Daniel Ross. I was the lead systems engineer at Black Ridge Station, an American research outpost buried deep within the Antarctic interior. Officially, the station was decommissioned due to unstable glacial flow and equipment loss during a routine geological mission. That is a lie. The truth is far worse than anything anyone could imagine. We found something that was never meant to be uncovered, and what waited beneath the ice was not dead nor forgotten. It was waiting, watching. It all began over 2 years ago, back in the winter of 2023. We were part of a high-profile international initiative called Project Deepwell, a joint endeavor involving American, Canadian, and European climate science foundations, alongside government contractors. Our goal seemed clear: to drill through one of the planet's deepest and most ancient ice sheets and extract bedrock samples from the Earth's pre-glacial crust. These rocks hadn't touched daylight in millions of years. For geologists, it was the Holy Grail, untapped pages from the planet's autobiography. For me, it was just another job, cold, endless, and methodical. Black Ridge Station was a modular complex of 4 insulated units connected by reinforced tunnels, a temporary home to a team of 12. There was no sky, no horizon, only endless white in every direction for over 1,000 miles. I was in charge of maintaining and operating the core drill system, a hydraulic monster of steel and diamond descending like a mechanical worm through layer upon layer of ancient ice. Every day blurred into the next, a grinding cycle of calibration, pressure checks, sensor alignment, core retrieval, and thermal regulation. The ice we pulled up from the depths came in long cylinders, each one a frozen chapter of Earth's forgotten epochs. Tiny air bubbles inside told stories of past atmospheres. Embedded layers of volcanic ash whispered about cataclysms long gone. Dr. Elizabeth Carr, our senior geologist, could spend hours bent over the microscope, whispering to the past through those glacial scrolls. To her, they were sacred texts. To me, they were weight and data. Inch by inch, foot by foot, we drilled downward into time. The first 18 months passed without major incident. We reached depths of over 10,000 feet. The ice surrounding us was already more than 500,000 years old. Morale was stable, though the isolation gnawed at us in quiet ways. Our station chief, Colonel Lucas Harper, a retired military logistics officer, ran a tight ship. No one drank. No one fought. We were professionals, focused, competent, and mostly quiet. Sometimes in the evenings, we'd gather in the common module to watch old movies, play cards, or try to ignore the fact that we were ants at the bottom of the world. But everything changed when we passed the depth of 16,000 feet. That was when the drill began to behave. Strangely, the bit sensors started relaying anomalies. Vibration levels increased, but not in the way they did when hitting solid inclusions or dense strata. The feedback from the drill head changed in tone, a deep, harmonic resonance, steady and unnatural. It was like we were pressing against something smooth, not fractured, not natural. "What the hell is that?" Elizabeth asked, not looking away from her console. Her voice, normally calm and analytical, held an edge of uncertainty I'd never heard before. "I don't know," I muttered, flipping through the diagnostics. "The density is beyond anything we've mapped, hardness off the charts. The diamond heads are shredding, they're not even leaving a scratch." We halted all operations. Harper called for an emergency briefing. Theories ranged from buried meteorite alloys to high-density volcanic glass. But none of them accounted for the scanner readings. Whatever we hit, it wasn't geological, it was precise. flat, artificial. We attempted core retrieval multiple times. Nothing worked. Our toughest borers were ineffective. The structure resisted all physical penetration. It was like trying to drill through a shadow cast in iron. Tension crept through the station. We kept running tests, simulations, anything to decode what lay below. Eventually, Harper authorized deployment of our experimental deep penetration radar array, a classified piece of imaging tech designed for subterranean topography. It had never been run at full capacity. Until then. The setup took 2 days. Our radar specialist, Michael Tran, young, twitchy, brilliant, barely slept. When we were finally ready, we all gathered in the operations bay, eyes glued to the main monitor. Line by line, the system began to render a visual of what was beneath us. At first, it was incomprehensible static, blotches and noise, but as the data compiled, something took shape. A flat surface, not a hill, not a dome. A flawless horizontal plane stretching in every direction beyond the range of our instruments. It wasn't geology, it was geometry. Something had built a colossal plate and buried it beneath 5 vertical kilometers of glacial ice. Elizabeth ran a rapid age analysis on the surrounding strata. The ice above it was over 800,000 years old. That meant whatever we had touched was older, much older. In the silence of the operations module, everyone stared at the screen. No one spoke. We knew we had found something impossible, something not of our world. Then the orders came. 12 hours later, after a coded report was sent to HQ, we received a reply. It was blunt and beyond debate. Alpha priority, proceed by all means available. Total communication lockdown. Additional directives en route. Alpha priority meant one thing: military oversight. The civilian mission was over. We were now assets under command. We had only one piece of tech capable of penetrating the object, an experimental laser bore developed by a defense contractor for ultra-deep drilling tests. It was never meant to be used at these depths. The risks were enormous. A thermal breach could cause catastrophic steam explosions, collapse the shaft, or worse. But we had no alternative. We spent 6 days preparing the system, running stress tests, recalibrating for full capacity. I oversaw every step. The air in the station was thick with unease. We knew we were standing at the edge of something monumental or disastrous. When the system went live, the hum of the generators shook the walls. On the monitor, I watched as a beam of searing white light struck the black surface below. Millimeter by millimeter, it began to burn through. Not melt, not vaporize. The substance didn't behave like any known element. It didn't resist or crack. It simply vanished under the laser as though retreating from existence itself. Then on the 57th hour, the pressure sensors dropped. Breach. We had pierced it. Beneath that impossible slab was a void. A hollow space extending downward into unknowable depth. What we did next, sending the probe, was the first true step into the unknown. We built a custom tethered drone with floodlights, high-res cameras, and atmospheric sensors. And when we lowered it through the borehole, we gathered around the monitors with our breath held. The lens passed through the smooth black shaft, then into darkness. Endless, complete darkness. I switched on the lights, and we saw stairs. Wide, angular steps carved directly into the stone, spiraling down into the abyss, made of the same flawless black substance, but not constructed, not assembled. The stairs were part of the whole. as if the entire thing had been carved from a single piece of night. But that was not the worst part. The worst was the footprints. On the top step, in a fine layer of dust, were tracks. Long, narrow, three-toed impressions, not human, not aged, fresh. Someone had walked down those stairs recently, and they knew we were here. The decision to descend was made without a vote. Orders were orders. Colonel Harper assembled a field unit of 4. I was chosen as the technical lead. No one else knew the equipment like I did. Elizabeth Carr would go as mission scientist, her expertise in geology and xenobiology now far more relevant than anyone wanted to admit. The remaining 2 were security specialists, Carter and Mitchell, both former Marines, both silent and surgically efficient. Their job wasn't just defense, it was survival. Heavy packs, climbing rigs, atmosphere sensors, light mapping tools, and if necessary, suppressive fire. We had no idea what was waiting for us, no map, no rules, just the cold certainty that something waited below and that it had already noticed our presence. Our preparations were frantic. Each of us was fitted into full-body thermal suits rated for deep vacuum and sub-zero exposure. Despite the probe reporting a stable atmosphere, we didn't trust it. Each suit carried an independent closed-loop breathing system, oxygen scrubbers, and manual overrides. Our helmets were fitted with high-lumen LED beams, camera links, and external mics. We carried enough synthetic rope to rappel 100 floors down, reinforced harnesses, and a compact motor winch for extraction, assuming we ever needed to come back up. Elizabeth packed what she considered essential: a portable mass spectrometer, radiation counter, air comp analyzer, and a handheld ground radar unit to scan walls and voids. Redundancies were added where we could. Redundant batteries, backup lights, secondary oxygen capsules. Even with all that, we felt woefully unprepared. Harper stayed behind. Someone had to monitor our descent, record telemetry, and keep a link open to command. He promised he wouldn't leave the comms station until we were back. At dawn, if that word means anything on the polar plateau, we descended. I went first. Hooked into the main cable, I lowered myself into the narrow shaft, legs pressed against the glassy walls, laser-cut and unnaturally smooth. 5 vertical kilometers of ice loomed above. It felt like the weight of the world sat on my chest. The moment I cleared the thickness of the black slab, I entered the void. Hanging in blackness. No sound. No wind. Only the hiss of my breath. I switched on my headlamp. Light pierced the dark. Below, a stairway revealed itself. Massive steps chiseled into the impossible stone, leading down into eternity. I detached from the lift rope, clipped into a wall tether, and signaled the others. One by one, Carter, Mitchell, and Elizabeth dropped down. When we finally stood together on that staircase, we looked up. A pinprick of light from the shaft above was the only visible link to Earth. Then we looked down. Our headlamps barely touched the curve of the stairs ahead. The rest vanished into infinite black. And the silence, that unnatural silence, was unbearable. There was no ambient hum, no air movement, no echo. Sound didn't return, it was swallowed. Eaten. It made your breath feel too loud, your heartbeat oppressive. The atmosphere registered a steady -30 degrees. Elizabeth's readings confirmed what we'd seen through the probe. Breathable air, though strange. Roughly 70% nitrogen, 15% oxygen, the rest argon and trace inert compounds. Radiation levels were low. She hesitated, then unsealed her helmet. We followed. Each of us held our helmets close, just in case. The footprints were even more disturbing in person. Each print was narrow, deep, three-toed, ending in subtle claw-like indents. The stride length indicated a bipedal gait, but nothing matched human anatomy. Elizabeth gently scraped a dust sample into a container. Then we began the descent. Carter led. I followed. Elizabeth came third. Mitchell brought up the rear. We moved slowly, deliberately. Each step echoed in our bones, not in the air. The stairs weren't slick, but had a strange texture, porous and gritty, like hardened coral or volcanic foam, though they looked smooth. Elizabeth ran a surface scan. Her handheld spectrometer blinked and buzzed, then went dark. "That's not right," she murmured, resetting it. Still nothing. "It's absorbing the signal," she whispered. "The surface doesn't reflect, it eats light. That shouldn't be possible." We descended 100 steps, then reached a square landing, roughly 30 feet across. Then another 100, another landing. It repeated. The geometry was inhuman, perfect. No decorations, no rails, just the hypnotic monotony of black angles and silence. On the fifth platform, by my estimate 150 meters down, the problems began. First came the interference. "Team, come in!" Harper's voice crackled in my ear. "We're losing your signal. There's interference." Then static. Then silence. "Command, repeat," I said. Nothing. Then the radar unit in my hand flickered and died. I tried power cycling it. No use. Dead. "They're all going out," Carter muttered. He didn't say malfunction. He said, "They're going out." Like something was turning them off. Something was. Whatever lay in that place didn't want us broadcasting. It wanted us blind. And now we were. We held an emergency huddle. Mitchell argued to return, without comms or tracking. Pushing deeper would be suicide. But Elizabeth disagreed. "We don't know what's causing the interference," she said, trying to sound calm. "If it's directional or environmental, we may not be able to climb back out. The laser systems up top might already be compromised. We go down, that's our only path." She was right. Down we went. Landings became markers. 200 steps. 300. 1,000. Time no longer moved in hours, but in staircases. The walls around us seemed to press closer, though they never truly did. My light played across their surface. Always black, always absorbing, always watching. I began to believe the stone itself was alive, not in a breathing way, but in a way that remembers, like it was waiting for someone to return, or for someone to trigger it again. Around 800 meters in, or what felt like it, the structure changed. The stairway flattened out. We entered a chamber the size of a football field. No clear ceiling, no echo. At the far end stood a structure, monolithic, immense. Our lights were too weak to illuminate its top. It wasn't a building or a machine. Its shape was organic, like a petrified organism or an enormous fossilized bone. Carter and Mitchell instinctively raised their weapons. Elizabeth and I stepped closer. Then we saw the carving. The surface of the structure was covered in elaborate reliefs, figures, thousands of them, tall, thin, three-fingered beings, like those whose tracks we'd followed. But these figures weren't triumphant. They were in agony, their bodies twisted in horror, fleeing, all running in the same direction, up, toward the stairs, fleeing something far below. This was no temple, no throne room. It was a warning. The staircase wasn't built to descend to greatness. It was an escape route, a way out, and we were walking in reverse. Then we heard it. The first sound in that vast tomb, a slow, grinding scrape, stone dragged against stone. It echoed from a corridor on the far side of the monolith, faint, distant, but growing. Something down there was moving, something impossibly large, and it was coming. We had not found a dead city, we had broken into a nest. The grinding noise was getting louder, steady, rhythmic, inhuman. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a howl, it was mechanical in nature, methodical and precise, like a machine far older than memory performing a task for which it had never been given permission to stop. The sound vibrated through the stone beneath our feet, through our bones, through whatever courage we had left. Carter's voice snapped us back into motion. "Get behind the structure," he ordered. "Defensive position, now." We retreated toward the base of the massive carved monument, half shielded by its shape. Carter and Mitchell took positions on either side, rifles aimed toward the corridor. I switched my helmet lamp to full intensity. Elizabeth stood beside me, unmoving. Her face, pale and transfixed, carried not only fear but fascination. She wasn't trembling. She was studying. Her mind raced, even as her body stiffened. That was Elizabeth. Even staring into the unknown, she wanted to understand it. The sound grew louder, closer. Then something moved. Out of the darkness of the corridor, a shape slid into view. But it wasn't a shape. It was many. A swarm. A writhing, segmented wave of angular limbs and slicing shadows. They didn't move like animals. They didn't move like machines. They glitched. They twitched and flickered like frames missing from a film reel. One moment they were a blur of jagged spines, the next a network of insectoid legs, then a storm of broken glass and obsidian. They absorbed the light. That's what I remember most. They didn't reflect it, they consumed it. Where they moved, the dark grew darker. The screeching sound came from their limbs, metal on stone, constant, overlapping, an orchestra of dread. They moved without hesitation, without speed, without mercy. Not predators, not hunters, cleaners, guardians, and we were contaminants. "Fire!" Carter's shout cracked like thunder. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the dead air. For the first time, sound bounced in the chamber, a mocking echo against the lifeless walls. Bullets hit the swarm. Some sparked. Others passed straight through. Nothing dropped. Nothing reacted. They just kept advancing. Silent, relentless, unaffected. "They're not real," I shouted. "Or they're shielded, phase-shifted, something." Mitchell was already reloading. His expression said everything. This wasn't a fight. It was a countdown. "Back to the stairs!" Carter bellowed. We ran. We weren't scientists anymore. We weren't explorers. We were prey. Prey that had wandered into a place designed to be sterile, perfect, untouched. We sprinted across the chamber toward the mouth of the stairwell, shadows snapping at our heels. I could feel the pressure of them behind me, the hunger of their silence. The steps appeared like salvation. Massive, angular, still. We began to climb, step after step, 30, 50, 100. I lost count. We scrambled upward, blood roaring in our ears, legs burning, lungs screaming. I turned my light across the walls as we ran. Then I saw them, the patterns. The walls of the shaft weren't blank. They were inscribed, intricately. They shimmered as our lights caught them. Pale lines like frost, crisscrossing in impossible geometry. At first I thought it was circuitry. a network of glowing veins. But as we ascended, the scale became clearer. It wasn't just decoration, it was language, memory, a record, a history carved into the stone itself. Elizabeth saw it too. "It's not random," she gasped. "This whole place, it's a data core." A biological drive. They carved their history into the walls. We kept climbing. 500 steps, then 1,000. The grinding noise from below was fading, but not vanishing. They weren't chasing us, not directly. They didn't need to. They owned the space. And they would find us eventually. At the next platform, we stopped to catch breath. Cold air burned our lungs. Frost clung to the inside of my suit. Mitchell leaned against the wall, eyes closed. "I think we lost them," he muttered. Then his eyes snapped open, not from the bottom, from above. We all heard it. The same grinding scrape. But it was coming from the top, a second wave, another patrol, another wall of death descending from above. They were driving us, herding us. The system was awake now, and we were deep inside it. There would be no escape upward, no return. We were trapped in a shaft that now felt like a throat, and we were being swallowed. "Look there!" Carter pointed his light downward, a small, narrow opening in the wall. We had passed it on the way up without seeing it. A rectangular slot barely large enough to crawl through, maybe a meter high, half as wide, not a hallway, a duct. "A vein or a vent. Move! In now!" Carter shouted. "Elizabeth, Daniel, go! We'll hold them!" "What?" Elizabeth turned. "What about you? We'll delay them. Get deeper. Get safe. Do something with this!" Mitchell was already reloading again, his jaw set, eyes hollow. They had made their decision. There was no time to argue. I shoved Elizabeth toward the duct. She climbed in, crawling fast. I followed. Behind me, the light of our headlamps flickered against the stone. Then Carter and Mitchell turned toward the descending horror. Gunfire again. Then silence. I don't remember how long we crawled. The tunnel was narrow, barely enough room to move on hands and knees. Our suits scraped the walls, our helmets bumped the ceiling. The dark was absolute, and the air felt thinner. Elizabeth was silent. So was I. Behind us, only memory, the sounds of steel on stone. The screams, the silence after. We were in a machine. A world of stone and memory, of logic and decay. And it did not want us here. The crawl space was coffin-like, a tunnel so tight it stole breath not from pressure, but from the mind. Our shoulders scraped both walls with every movement. My knees ground into the floor with each push forward. Elizabeth's breath was ragged ahead of me, the glow of her headlamp bouncing along the dark like a drowning firefly. We didn't speak. We didn't ask how far. We just kept moving, pressed between the ribs of a monster too vast to comprehend. At some point I realized it wasn't cold anymore. The air, though thin, had changed. It felt warmer, heavier, more humid. Elizabeth whispered it first. "Atmosphere's shifting." Her voice echoed strangely in the tight tunnel, like speaking from within a skull. She checked her wrist module. Temperatures rising, 10 degrees Celsius and climbing. Oxygen 21%. But, it's something else. She paused. There are organic compounds in the air. Complex, unidentifiable. They're not toxic, at least not yet. The walls began to change too. At first, they were just black and silent. Then came texture. Fine ridges beneath our gloves like fossilized veins or vascular tissue. Soon after, the color shifted. Glimmers of faint blue began to pulse beneath the surface, spreading in thin patterns that flowed like nerves. Not random, not decoration, signals. It was like we were crawling through the circulatory system of a sleeping god. And then we saw the light, not the sharp beam of our headlamps. This was ambient, soft, low, and growing. A blue-white shimmer up ahead that pulsed like breath. The tunnel began to widen, first enough for us to move on all fours, then tall enough to crouch. Finally, after what felt like hours, we emerged, blinking, aching, into a chamber so vast it felt like stepping into the sky. We stood on a ledge of black stone, looking out over a subterranean world. But world wasn't the right word. Habitat, womb, refuge. Before us lay a space that defied measurement. There was no ceiling, only a sphere of light hanging far above like an artificial sun, its surface swirling with color. Below, stretching out in every direction, was a landscape of the impossible. Pillars of translucent crystal rose like trees, each one pulsing faintly with internal light. Their trunks twisted like frozen smoke, tapering into filigree canopies. Between them flowed rivers of silver liquid, moving in perfect silence, their surfaces glowing with reflected stars. The ground was covered in moss, lavender and violet, soft and swaying despite the absence of wind. The air smelled of damp stone, electric ozone, and something faintly floral. It wasn't dead. It wasn't decayed. It was flourishing. We didn't speak for a long time. The only sound was our breath. And then, movement. Far below, among the crystalline groves, they walked. Tall, skeletal figures, impossibly thin and long-limbed. Their skin, if it was skin, shimmered like mother of pearl, but without texture. Their faces were featureless, except for a faint glow beneath the surface, pulsing like bioluminescence. We had seen them carved into the monolith. Now they moved, slowly, gracefully, unhurried and unhunted. They touched the crystal trees, and the trees responded, growing brighter. Some knelt beside the silver rivers, fingers immersed in the glowing current. They were not panicked, not fleeing, not afraid. They were home. Elizabeth sank to her knees, overwhelmed. I stood frozen, heart hammering, trying to process what we were seeing. "This isn't ruins," she said, her voice choked. "This is preservation. It's still functioning. The whole place is a habitat, a living system. They didn't die out. They went inward. They built a world inside the earth." And the Guardians? The obsidian swarm that nearly killed us. They weren't predators. They were antibodies. Defense protocols. They were designed to repel infection, intrusion, United States. We were a threat. We were the virus. We retreated into the shadows of the tunnel, afraid of being seen. But something told me we already had been. Down in the valley, one of the figures paused. It didn't look. It simply turned, slowly, deliberately, in our direction. There were no eyes, no expression, but I felt it. It knew. A heartbeat later, the world began to change. The light in the chamber shifted. The gentle blue of the crystals began to dim, replaced by a colder tone, a sterile red that seeped through the trees and across the ground. The rivers of light darkened, the moss flattened. The chamber was responding, not in panic, not in fear, in protocol. We had triggered the alarm. And the world, this perfectly balanced, sterile, artificial ecosystem, was about to reject us. The light changed first. What had been a soft, internal radiance shifted, sharpened. The glowing crystals dimmed into deeper hues, their tones sliding from serene blues to ominous crimsons. The moss that covered the valley floor darkened visibly, as though draining of color. From beneath the silver rivers, tiny pulses of red began to rise, like heat rising through water. The very air took on a sharper taste, metallic, sterile. The scent of ozone thickened until it stung the sinuses. A transformation was underway, not violent but methodical, clinical. The environment had detected contamination. It had labeled us as foreign matter, and it was preparing to expel us. Elizabeth and I remained in the tunnel, crouched in shadow, too afraid to move, too aware that movement might seal our fate. Below us, the figures had stopped. Each of them, dozens at least, turned in eerie unison toward our ledge. No speech, no motion, just that slow, synchronized rotation. They stood still as statues, heads tilted upward. It felt like the gaze of something not curious but diagnostic, as if the system itself had noticed an anomaly in its code. We backed away inch by inch until the chamber's red light could no longer touch us. "We triggered the immune system," Elizabeth whispered, her voice barely audible. "It isn't war, it's maintenance. We're an error they're trying to isolate." Even as we whispered, the world around us shifted further. Near the ledge where we had emerged, crystal growths began to bloom. At first they were elegant, delicate. Then they thickened, hardened, expanded with frightening speed. Razor-edged facets unfolded like obsidian blades, stretching across the ledge like the petals of a closing trap. Behind us, the tunnel pulsed with red streaks of light, as if the structure itself had begun sealing off the vein we had entered through. "Move!" I shouted, grabbing Elizabeth's arm. We turned and ran. The crystal was closing, not to crush, to seal. The system was isolating the infection. It didn't want revenge, it wanted sterilization. Quarantine, this wasn't an attack, this was protocol. We sprinted back through the narrowing tunnel, light flashing red-blue-red as the structure reconfigured around us. From behind, the faint hum of energy surged like a wall collapsing on our heels. At one point, a shard of crystal erupted from the wall to our left, slicing through the tunnel space where Elizabeth had stood half a second earlier. She stumbled forward, barely catching herself. "Keep moving!" I shouted, pushing her ahead. "Don't stop for anything!" The deeper we went, the hotter the air became. My visor fogged, my suit felt too tight. Sweat pooled beneath my collar, but I didn't dare stop to wipe it. Every second mattered. Eventually we saw it. The end of the tunnel. A faint blue glow at first, then a clearer aperture. We burst through it into a familiar space. The stairwell. The shaft of descent. The place where we had first seen the carvings, the impossible footprints, the endless drop into shadow. But it was no longer silent. The shaft had changed. It was awake. Dozens of the black, spindly sentinels now moved along the walls. Not randomly. Not searching, patrolling, perfectly spaced, perfectly timed. They glided with precise rhythm, as though operating on a single, networked mind. Their limbs scraped softly, leaving no sound behind them, only a wave of stillness that traveled with each step. Every platform, every stairwell was under watch. Elizabeth clutched my shoulder. "We can't go back," she said, her voice broken with certainty. "They've filled every path, every exit. We're not escaping." "We have to try," I said. But even as I spoke, I didn't believe it. The ascent became a game of breath and silence. We moved from platform to platform only when the path was clear, ducking into alcoves, pressing ourselves against cold black walls, freezing as patrols passed inches from our helmets. The sentinels didn't look, they didn't scan. They simply moved like blood cells through arteries, like code through a processor. The moment they detected us, they would react. Twice, we were nearly caught. Once I had to pull Elizabeth backward by the collar into a crevice so narrow I scraped open my knuckles against the wall. Another time, we flattened ourselves to the floor, lights off, breath held, as two sentinels glided past in unison, less than 2 meters away. Their legs moved like scissors, each joint unfolding with eerie grace, each tip tapping the stone like a clock counting down to something terrible. We kept climbing. The carvings on the walls changed as we rose. Elizabeth began whispering what she saw, barely audible, like interpreting scripture. This isn't just architecture, it's memory. Look, there. Construction, then harmony, then conflict. Her light scanned upward. The glyphs changed from order to chaos. The serene figures we had seen below became twisted, broken, pursued. They were fleeing, running up these same stairs, escaping something. She paused at one mural, breath caught. It wasn't ice, she said. It wasn't climate collapse. They weren't hiding from Earth. They were hiding from something else. She shone her light upward to a depiction of stars. Then a blot, a devouring mass. They were fleeing from something that came from above. The truth hit like a hammer. They had built this world, this perfect buried Eden, not to outlast weather or time, but to survive something ancient, something cosmic, something that destroyed their surface world. And our drilling, our intrusion, might have been the first signal flare in hundreds of thousands of years. We had not just discovered a forgotten civilization. We might have doomed it. We kept climbing. Not toward rescue, toward guilt. Each step was heavier than the last, not because of exhaustion, but because of what we now carried. Knowledge. The carvings made it undeniable. These beings hadn't gone extinct. They had retreated, fled downward from something that came from above, a force so vast, so annihilating that ice was not a consequence, but a symptom. The world had frozen not by accident, but as aftermath. The surface wasn't simply abandoned. It was made sterile, scorched, drowned, and buried beneath kilometers of silence. And we had cut through that silence like a needle through skin. Elizabeth no longer spoke. Her mouth moved, but only in murmurs I couldn't hear. She was tracing the glyphs with her gloved fingers, eyes wide with something beyond fear, awe, horror, regret. I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. We passed another mural. The 3-fingered beings were no longer running. They were kneeling, hands raised, praying or surrendering. And above them loomed a shape, massive, amorphous, star black. It had no face, no edges, only hunger. We had reached a point in the shaft where the walls were vibrating, not from machinery, from resonance, a deep, bone-level hum that passed through us in slow waves. It wasn't sound, it was pressure, like standing next to something impossibly ancient that had never stopped breathing. I checked my helmet diagnostics. The atmosphere had stabilized again. Oxygen and nitrogen levels were steady, but something else was off. The system registered unknown particulate activity, constantly fluctuating values, alive, unidentifiable. I didn't tell Elizabeth. I knew what it meant. The air wasn't just reacting to us, it was watching us. Then came the decision. We were halfway to the shaft's upper access corridor when we reached a large platform, one we recognized. It had once been a Safe place. Now it was a death trap. Sentinel patterns above and below had changed, no longer sweeping, now stationary, positioned, waiting, a blockade. "They know we're here," I said. "They're forcing our hand." Elizabeth leaned against the wall, clutching her leg. I hadn't noticed how badly she was limping. A tear in her suit's outer layer bled dark, synthetic fluid. Beneath it, her calf was swollen. "I twisted it," she whispered. "Back in the duct. I didn't want to slow us down." "You didn't," I lied. She looked at me then. Really looked. Her face was pale, her eyes ringed with sweat and dust, and a desperation I now shared. "You have to go," she said. "You can make it to the top. I'll hold this position. Keep them distracted." "No." The word came out more like a plea than a refusal. "No, we stay together. We wait for a break in their pattern. We find another path." "There's no other path, Daniel." She was right. There was only one cable, one route, one chance, and not enough time. The sound came again. The low screech of metal limbs scraping on stone. Closer now, measured. They were moving again, not charging, advancing, like a system executing subroutines. That was when I made the only choice I could. I clipped Elizabeth's harness to the emergency ascent line. The cable still dangled from the shaft ceiling. The same line we'd used to descend days ago, before time lost meaning. I activated her lift motor. "Daniel, don't—" "Hold on," I said.
"You tell them. You make them understand what we found, what it means that we didn't come to destroy." Her body began to rise, slow but steady, toward the dim circle of white above. Her hand clutched the cable.
Her other reached toward me, fingers trembling, and I turned to face the dark. I stood alone on the platform, flashlight in one hand, a steel geologist's hammer in the other. The only object I'd grabbed in that final moment. Useless, laughable, but it gave weight to my grip. Focus to my breath. From the shadows below they emerged, not many, just two. That was all it took. Their limbs moved in elegant angles, faster now. They sensed my presence, and they were responding. Not with emotion, with logic. I roared. It wasn't fear, it wasn't defiance, it was sound, raw and human, in a place built to erase sound. I wanted to make sure they saw me, not Elizabeth, me. When they lunged, I ran straight at them. That was the last thing I remember clearly. I regained consciousness lying near the mouth of the borehole, face down on the ice, suit torn and half frozen, my visor cracked and blood dried into the fabric of my collar. Above me, a pale, still sky.
Not a sound, not even wind. The world felt paused. Didn't know how I had gotten out. The lift system should have been offline. I shouldn't have survived. And yet I had. My limbs ached like I'd been dragged up 5 kilometers by ghosts.
The station was empty, every module abandoned, lights dimmed, doors half open, screens frozen on error messages, and biometric locks blinking for codes no one was left to enter.
I wandered through it like through the ruins of something sacred and broken. Food trays left out, chairs knocked over, medical kits open on the floor, no blood, no struggle, just sudden absence.
One of the outer airlocks had been sealed shut with a welder from the inside, evidence of desperation. On the comm terminal in the main corridor, I found the last message. Evacuation complete. Do not attempt re-entry.
Lockdown permanent. I sat by the borehole for 36 hours, barely moving. My radio was dead. The wind didn't return. Nothing did. Then, without sound, a dark helicopter appeared from the white horizon. No insignia, no markings.
Just matte black metal and two men in masks who didn't say a word. They lifted me without questions, sedated me in the air. I woke up, strapped to a medical bed, IV in my arm, light in my eyes.
A voice repeated only one sentence. You are the sole survivor, everything else is classified. I later learned they sealed the hole, poured hundreds of cubic meters of polymer concrete into the shaft, then welded a thick steel plate over the site.
All equipment was destroyed, all data confiscated, every log, sample and recording was erased. According to every file, we had discovered nothing. A drilling anomaly, a structural instability, a failed project. The truth would never see light. But I remember. People like to believe we seek knowledge to understand the universe. But some truths were never meant for us. Some depths were sealed not to keep us out, but to keep something else in. Something that is still listening. Weeks passed, or maybe months. I was moved from the facility without notice. No explanation, no documents, just a sudden change in ceiling color and temperature. The new place was colder, quieter. The walls were padded, but not like in hospitals, like in interrogation chambers built for those who knew too much. I was interviewed, but never by faces, only by voices through speakers, calm and rehearsed. They asked about the drilling process, about the artifact, about the creatures. Never once did they ask how I felt. Never once did they mention Elizabeth. At night, I dreamed of the staircase, always descending, always alone. Sometimes I heard the grinding metal. Sometimes I saw the glyphs move. Sometimes I saw the guardians waiting in silence as I approached. I'd wake with my fists clenched, my mouth dry, the taste of old stone still in my throat. I stopped sleeping after a while. Eventually, the questioning ended. They told me I was free to go, that I had suffered stress-induced psychosis, that everything I remembered was a hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation and prolonged exposure to isolation. They even gave me a folder full of evidence to support their version of events. Doctored photos, forged transcripts, a timeline that ended with an equipment malfunction and an aborted mission. It was a lie so polished it almost gleamed. But they couldn't fake the scar on my leg. They couldn't explain the microfractures in my teeth. And they couldn't erase the sound I still hear. When it's too quiet, when I close my eyes, the distant scrape of stone on stone. I tried to return to normal life. I rented a room in a cold northern town where no one asked questions. I fixed machinery in garages, I avoided mirrors, I stopped looking at stars. But the truth doesn't stay buried. Some nights the lights in my apartment flicker, all at once, and in the dark I see that same faint red pulp. They think they sealed it. They didn't. The earth shifts, ice moves, systems fail. And I know now, what we uncovered wasn't a city. It wasn't a tomb. It was a vault, and vaults are never sealed forever. I began recording again, but only on paper. No electronics, no signals. I don't trust anything that runs on power anymore. Too many devices have blinked out near me. Streetlights, radios, even the microwave at a neighbor's house. Once, I touched a supermarket freezer, and every unit in the aisle died at once. Static crawled through my fingertips. The woman beside me turned pale and said nothing, but she knew something was wrong. The worst part isn't the dreams, it's the moments in daylight when everything seems normal. That's when I hear it clearest. A hum, barely audible beneath the sound of wind or distant traffic. like the frequency of something not designed for human ears. A language of resonance, a memory carried through rock. I tried to trace back the location, where they took me, where they dropped me, where they buried it. But the coordinates no longer match any map. The satellite imagery blurs when I zoom in. The public reports list nothing. No record of Blackridge Station, no mention of Project Deepwell, as if the Earth itself conspired to erase the wound we opened. But I remember the patterns. I see them sometimes, on sidewalks, in frost on windows, in the circuits of broken screens. The same geometry. Sharp, perfect. Too precise for nature, too alive to be dead, and I'm not the only one. A man followed me home once. He didn't speak, but his jacket had a patch, a black triangle with no name. He stared at me for a long time before walking away. Another time, a letter arrived. No return address, no stamp. Inside, only a single sentence. "You brought something back." I burned it, but it didn't matter because they're right. I brought something back. And it's still inside me. I began writing down every symbol I saw in the dreams. At first, it was just scribbles. Nervous marks on napkins, receipts, corners of walls. Then the lines began forming sequences, precise angles, recurring intersections. I recognized them not with my mind, but somewhere deeper, like a melody I didn't remember learning. The more I wrote, the worse the world around me reacted. Lights flickered. Dogs barked at nothing. Radios filled with static. And always, the pressure in my skull, like some unseen lid, twisting slowly tighter. I took it all to a physicist once, someone I trusted, a friend from years back. He studied the diagrams for over an hour without speaking. When he finally looked up, his hands were shaking. "This isn't math," he said, "it's instruction. Rotational geometry, recursive symmetry. This is language meant for matter."
Not people. He gave the papers back and told me not to contact him again. Soon after, someone broke into my apartment. Nothing was taken, but the symbols I had drawn on the walls, carefully, obsessively, were all wiped clean. Not painted over, erased. I ran my fingers over where they had been, and the plaster felt wrong, as if it had been replaced, as if the material remembered being changed. That night, I heard something under the floor, not footsteps, breathing, slow, deep, not human.
I moved again, but it didn't matter. Wherever I went, the dreams returned, the walls flickered, the hum followed. I could feel them, the guardians, not chasing me, not hunting, but watching, not as predators, as monitors. I was no longer an intruder. I was a signal source. I'd brought the infection back to the surface, and now they were tracking its resonance. Not to punish me, to contain me, to decide whether Earth itself needed to be sterilized. I moved inland, far from cables, towers, and machines. No signal, no power lines, just cold wind and silence. I lived in a decaying farmhouse, the kind that seemed forgotten even by maps. The first weeks were still. My body began to slow, as if uncoiling from years of tension. I stopped drawing symbols. I stopped speaking out loud. But the quiet didn't bring peace. It brought clarity. The thoughts that weren't mine, I realized they'd never truly stopped. They were just patient. Beneath the stillness, something inside me had been listening to the world, measuring it, recording. Every pattern of speech, every breath I took, every irregularity in my heartbeat, all of it catalogued, not as memories,
as input. I was no longer just remembering the structure. I had become part of its memory.
Some nights I'd wake to find frost spreading across the inside of the windows, not in flowers or cracks, but in lines. Long and perfect, intersecting at angles too exact for randomness. I touched one once. It pulsed beneath my skin like a low-voltage wire, not cold, not warm, alive. My reflection looked wrong. My pupils held a faint glow that didn't vanish when I turned off the lights. I couldn't explain it, but I didn't panic. That emotion had been overwritten by something else. Quiet acceptance, like a system confirming its own integration. One night I heard it again, not with my ears, but with something deeper, a distant hum rising beneath the floorboards, pulsing with rhythm. It was the same vibration I had felt in the shaft, the memory field, the presence behind the walls. I knew then what I had become, not a survivor, not a messenger, a carrier. The vault had never meant to kill us. It had tested us, measured our structure, and it had found a medium it could use, a nervous system, a carrier wave, a mind, something that could leave the seal and move freely across the surface without needing to break it again. I was the antenna, and the signal had already left the ice. I tried to resist. I tried to fight it with noise, with movement, with pain. I burned the papers. I threw the last of my notebooks into a stream swollen with thaw. I carved a circle of salt around my bed and didn't sleep for 3 days. But nothing changed, because the invasion wasn't violent. It wasn't spiritual. It was structural. Something about that vault, that machine, had reconfigured me. Not my beliefs, not my soul, but the way I perceived, reacted, remembered. I began solving things I didn't understand, equations I had never studied. I knew the weight of invisible elements in the air. I sensed the distance between stars I'd never seen. I didn't hear voices. I became aware of instructions, layered, foreign, impossibly ancient. Instructions meant for a system far greater than one human being. The changes deepened. I stopped feeling cold. I stopped blinking as often. My dreams stopped being dreams. I'd wake up on the floor, surrounded by symbols etched into the wood by my own hands. My body moved without permission, not like possession, more like response, like a hard drive under silent command. Sometimes I'd hear tapping in the walls, and when I followed the sound, I'd find nothing, except small patterns scored into the corners of rooms. Always the same geometry. It wasn't haunting, it was mapping. I understood then what the vault was never meant to be: a grave. It was a receiver, a node of some vast planetary memory system, built not just to survive, but to learn, to absorb, to preserve. The Sentinels weren't guardians of a secret. They were regulators of its purity. The ancient beings were the ones who descended and vanished. They hadn't just built a sanctuary, they had uploaded themselves into it, and when we broke through, we didn't just wake it, we fed it, with new input, with new data, with me. I began to write again, not in English, not in words, but in the same angular language from the walls. I don't remember how I learned it. I only know that it calms the hum for a while. When I don't write, it grows louder. When I resist, it becomes unstable. The patterns repeat in dreams, in snow, in rain, in firelight. They pulse behind closed eyes, behind my heartbeat. I am no longer simply Daniel Ross, systems engineer from Colorado. I am something else, a bridge, a residue, an echo carrying new instructions across the skin of a world that thought it had buried them. I no longer sleep in one place for more than a few nights. I keep moving between the forgotten edges of rural highways beneath power lines that hum with too much weight. Wherever I go, the patterns follow. Not always visible, but felt. In static, in geometry, in timing. Once at a gas station, the pump display reset itself every time I touched the nozzle. A child behind me stared and whispered something in a language I didn't recognize. When I turned, his mother pulled him away in silence. I didn't blame her. Whatever they saw in my eyes wasn't human anymore. It was synchronization. I feel it in cities too. Their grids, their hidden rhythms, their invisible pulses. Traffic lights changing in unison. Elevators arriving without buttons pressed. Microwaves chiming with no power. I've stopped using phones. Every time I hold one, the screen goes black, and when it returns, the camera stays on. I think they're watching. Not the government, not some agency, but the system itself. The intelligence we awakened, the memory that stretches not only beneath the ice, but under every layer of stone, every fault line, every quiet forest and abandoned field. The vault was never the origin. It was a node, one of many.
I'm beginning to believe the Earth isn't just a planet. It's a host, or worse, a carrier, a storage medium for something older than us, older than history. And what we found wasn't alien, it wasn't a visitor, it was native, forgotten.
Buried for a reason. But now it remembers. And I can feel something shifting, not just in me, in the air, in the gravity of quiet spaces. People are seeing things, flashes of impossible symbols, strange sounds beneath subway floors, red light bleeding through cracks in concrete. It's starting to echo. I'm no longer the only carrier. I see them in crowds sometimes, others like me.
Pale, still, blinking less, glancing at the sky like they're waiting for something or listening. I know what's coming, not invasion, not destruction, a return, something long overdue, and we are the signal that called it back. I know this will be my last entry, not because I'm dying, not yet, but because something is shifting around me and within me. The signal is stabilizing. Whatever is inside me has completed its calibration. I no longer see the glyphs as symbols. I read them, not with thought, with recognition, like muscle memory passed down through stone. I no longer question whether this is real. It is. It always was. The vault didn't alter me. It revealed me, or revealed what I was always meant to carry.
I've stopped fearing the sentinels. I see them sometimes, not in shadow, but in reflections, in slow-moving silhouettes at the edge of mirrors. They never approach. They only observe. Because I'm no longer out of place. I've become integrated. Whatever they guard, whatever they preserve, I am now part of it. A link in the chain. A frequency aligned. I feel the resonance in my spine, in my breath, in the slow pulse of the earth beneath my feet. People have started disappearing, not in masses, not loudly, but quietly, precisely. Scientists, engineers, linguists, each one with ties to ancient sites, deep layers, abandoned minds. They vanish without trace. I believe they're being reclaimed, not kidnapped, not punished, absorbed, like data re-entering the core system after centuries of drift. What's coming isn't war. It's correction, a realignment of something we've distorted for too long. We were never meant to rule this planet. We were meant to observe, learn, pass through. But we lingered. We drilled too deep. We activated what was dormant, not dead. And now it's recalibrating everything, including us. This message, though, this record, will likely never be found, or if it is, it will be labeled fiction, madness, conspiracy. That's fine. I'm not writing this to be believed. I'm writing it because the last human part of me wants to remember what it was like to doubt, to wonder, to fear. When I close my eyes now, I don't see darkness. I see the stairs. I see Elizabeth waiting. I see the stars, not as fire, but as circuits. And I hear the voice of the vault, not speaking, but opening, not warning, welcoming.